What if I told you that somewhere in Silicon Valley, there's a piece of code that knows exactly when you're going to die? Not some mystical fortune-telling nonsense, but cold, hard, algorithmic precision. And what if I told you that 10,000 people have already discovered their death dates, and every single one of them stopped living the way they used to? Not because they became reckless daredevils or depressed hermits, but because they finally understood what it means to be truly alive. Now, before you start frantically Googling how to change death date, or checking if Amazon Prime delivers immortality potions, let me ask you something that's been rattling around in my brain like a marble in a tin can. What would you actually do with that information? I mean, think about it. We spend our entire lives pretending we're immortal, buying 30-year mortgages, planning retirement at 65, arguing about who forgot to take out the trash, as if these things will matter when we're pushing up daisies. But what happens when the universe decides to spoil the ending of your life like that friend who ruins movies? Here's where it gets beautifully twisted. Knowing when you'll die might just be the most liberating thing that could ever happen to you. Or the most terrifying. Maybe both. Probably both. See, humans are fascinating creatures. We're the only species on Earth that's simultaneously smart enough to contemplate our own mortality and dumb enough to spend most of our time forgetting we're mortal. It's like we're playing the world's most elaborate game of hide and seek with death. Except death always wins, and we all know it. But imagine if the game suddenly changed. Imagine if death walked up to you, tapped you on the shoulder, and said, "Hey there, champ. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We've got an appointment scheduled for Tuesday, April 8th, 2052. Don't be late." Suddenly, every decision becomes crystal clear, doesn't it? Or does it become impossibly complex? That's exactly what happened to Sarah Chun, a 28-year-old marketing executive from Portland who discovered her death date in the most unexpected way possible. And trust me, her story is about to make you question everything you think you know about living, dying, and what the hell we're all doing here on this spinning rock we call Earth. Because here's the thing, and stick with me on this journey because it gets weird, wonderful, and weirdly wonderful. Sarah's discovery didn't just change her life. It changed how she understood life itself. And by the time we're done exploring her story, you might find yourself looking at your own reflection differently, wondering if those numbers are floating there too, just waiting for the right moment to appear. So grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let's dive into a tale that's part science fiction, part philosophy class, and part, holy crap, what would you do? Thought experiment. Sarah's death revelation didn't come from a mystical fortune teller or a near-death experience. No, it came from something far more mundane and therefore infinitely more terrifying. A software glitch. She was beta testing a new health app called LifeTrack Pro, one of those annoyingly optimistic programs that promises to revolutionize your existence by monitoring everything from your heart rate to your grocery habits. The app was supposed to predict your life expectancy based on a complex algorithm involving your DNA data, lifestyle choices, family history, and probably the alignment of Jupiter's moons for all she knew. On Tuesday morning, October 3rd, 2023, Sarah opened the app expecting to see the usual cheerful reminder to drink more water or take 10,000 steps. Instead, she found a notification that made her coffee mug slip from her fingers and shatter on her kitchen floor. Life projection update complete. Estimated end date, November 27th, 2087. 64 years, 1 month, 24 days remaining. Now, most rational people would assume this was just another tech company making wildly inaccurate predictions. After all, these are the same people who thought Google Glass was a good idea. But Sarah had a PhD in bioinformatics from MIT and had actually helped develop similar predictive algorithms during her brief stint in academia. She knew good code from bad code, and this was disturbingly sophisticated. The app hadn't just spit out a random date. It had integrated her recent genetic test results, her medical records, her fitness tracker data, even her grocery receipts, because apparently, your relationship with cheese is a significant mortality factor. The algorithm had somehow accessed databases she didn't even know she'd given permission to access. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of panicking, Sarah did what any good scientist would do. She started researching. She dove deep into the app's code, reverse engineered the algorithm, and discovered something that made her question everything she thought she knew about predictive analytics. The algorithm wasn't just predicting her death, it was predicting everyone's death. And it was doing it with an accuracy rate that, according to her calculations, should have been statistically impossible. The beta test group included 10,000 people, and when Sarah cross-referenced the app's predictions with historical data, obituaries, and actuarial tables, the correlation was unnervingly precise. This wasn't just machine learning, this was machine knowing. Sarah spent the next 3 weeks in a state of controlled obsession, treating her life like a science experiment. She began documenting everything. What she ate, how she felt, who she talked to, what thoughts crossed her mind at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep because she kept calculating how many days she had left. 23,376, if anyone's counting. The strangest part wasn't knowing when she would die. It was realizing how little she had actually been living. Her days followed the same predictable pattern. Wake up, check emails, commute to a job that paid well, but meant nothing to her. Come home, watch Netflix, repeat. She was like a hamster on a wheel, except the hamster at least got exercise. But knowing her expiration date didn't initially make her want to quit her job and travel the world or write the great American novel. Instead, it made her profoundly curious about the nature of existence itself. If her death was predictable, what did that say about free will? If an algorithm could calculate the end of her story, was she the author of her life, or just a character following a predetermined script? These questions led her to Dr. Marcus Webb, a philosophy professor at Portland State University who specialized in the intersection of technology and human consciousness. Sarah showed up at his office hours on a rainy Thursday afternoon, clutching a manila folder full of printouts and looking, according to Dr. Webb's later recollection, like someone who had just discovered they were living inside a computer simulation. "Professor Webb," she said, sliding the folder across his cluttered desk, "I need to ask you something that's going to sound completely insane, but bear with me. If you knew exactly when you were going to die, would you still have free will?" Dr. Webb adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and spent the next hour listening to Sarah explain her discovery. By the time she finished, he had 3 questions. How confident was she in the algorithm's accuracy? Had she told anyone else? And most importantly, was she planning to do anything about it? That last question would change everything. The revelation was just the beginning. What Sarah discovered next would challenge everything she thought she knew about choice, destiny, and what it truly means to be alive. Dr. Webb's questions haunted Sarah for weeks, but it was his final question that sparked what she would later call the Great Life Experiment. The idea was elegantly simple and terrifyingly complex. If she knew when she was going to die, could she change it? This wasn't about cheating death. Sarah was too scientifically minded for that kind of magical thinking. This was about testing whether human consciousness could overcome algorithmic prediction. Could free will trump data science? It was like David versus Goliath, except David had a PhD and Goliath was coded in Python. Sarah's first hypothesis was straightforward. If she dramatically altered her lifestyle, the death date should shift. She quit her marketing job, started eating exclusively organic foods, began running marathons, and even took up meditation, which for someone with Sarah's type A personality was roughly equivalent to trying to teach a cat to play chess. The algorithm's response? November 27th, 2087. Not a day earlier, not a day later. Frustrated, but not defeated, Sarah escalated her approach. She moved to a different city, Boulder, Colorado, where the air was cleaner and the people were insufferably healthier. She enrolled in a yoga teacher training program, adopted a rescue dog named Schrodinger, because irony is important, and started volunteering at the local animal shelter. The algorithm's response? November 27th, 2087. Now, most people would have given up at this point, chalked it up to stubborn software, and gotten on with their lives. But Sarah had always been the kind of person who, when told something was impossible, would respond with, "Hold my coffee and watch this." Her breakthrough came during a conversation with her new neighbor, Elena Rodriguez, a former NASA engineer turned organic farmer who had an unusual perspective on prediction models. "You're thinking about this all wrong," Elena said as they sat on her porch, watching Schrodinger chase butterflies with a mathematical precision only dogs possess. "You're trying to change the inputs to alter the output, but what if the output is fixed because you're not changing the right variable?" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, scratching behind Schrodinger's ears as he returned, butterfly less but satisfied. Elena smiled. What if the algorithm isn't predicting when you'll die? What if it's predicting when the current version of you will cease to exist? This idea hit Sarah like a philosophical freight train. What if death wasn't just biological termination? What if it was the end of a particular way of being, thinking, existing? What if she could kill her current self and be reborn as someone entirely different, thus technically dying on schedule while somehow continuing to exist? It sounded like the kind of philosophical word game that would make Socrates proud and drive logicians to drink, but Sarah decided to test it anyway. She began what she called Project Phoenix, a systematic attempt to completely reinvent herself at the deepest possible level, not just changing her lifestyle or location, but fundamentally altering her identity, her relationships, her entire approach to existence. First, she started learning skills that were completely foreign to her analytical mind. Painting, music, interpretive dance, which she was terrible at, but that was kind of the point. She began reading poetry, studying ancient philosophy, exploring spiritual practices from cultures around the world. She was like a scientist trying to reverse engineer her own soul. But the real transformation came when she started helping other people who had discovered their death dates. Word about the app had leaked, and a small but growing community of lifers, as they called themselves, had emerged online. These were people grappling with the same existential crisis Sarah had faced, and she found herself becoming an unofficial counselor, guide, and fellow traveler on the strangest journey any of them had ever taken. There was Marcus, a 45-year-old accountant from Phoenix who had 23 years left and was learning to paint landscapes. There was Jennifer, a 33-year-old lawyer from Miami who had discovered she would die at 89 and decided to spend her remaining 56 years fighting environmental destruction. There was Ahmed, a 19-year-old college student who had 72 years remaining and was using that knowledge to study every subject that fascinated him without worrying about career prospects. Each of these people had made the same discovery Sarah had. Knowing when you'll die doesn't make you want to live faster. It makes you want to live deeper. But it was Ahmed who presented Sarah with the most intriguing challenge. During one of their online video calls, he asked her something that stopped her cold. Sarah, what if we're thinking about this all wrong? What if the algorithm isn't telling us when we'll die? What if it's telling us when we'll complete our purpose? This question launched Sarah into her deepest research phase yet. She began studying near-death experiences, researching reincarnation beliefs, exploring quantum theories about consciousness, even delving into the philosophy of artificial intelligence. She was trying to understand if there was a difference between biological death and purposeful completion. The more she studied, the more she realized that every spiritual tradition, philosophical system, and even some branches of physics suggested the same thing. Consciousness might not be as tied to biology as we assume. What if dying wasn't about your body stopping, but about completing whatever cosmic task you've been assigned? 6 months after starting Project Phoenix, Sarah looked in the mirror and realized she barely recognized herself. Not physically, though she was definitely in the best shape of her life, but existentially. The anxious, achievement-oriented marketing executive was gone. In her place was someone more curious, more compassionate, more connected to the world around her. She checked the app with trembling fingers. November 27th, 2087 stared back at her, unwavering as ever. But for the first time since discovering her death date, Sarah smiled, because she finally understood what the algorithm was really telling her. Sarah's revelation about the true nature of the death prediction would lead her to the most dangerous experiment of all, testing whether consciousness itself could transcend the boundaries of individual existence. The truth hit Sarah like a cosmic joke told by a universe with a seriously twisted sense of humor. The algorithm wasn't predicting her death at all. It was predicting the completion of her life's work. And her life's work, as it turned out, was to figure out exactly that. This realization came to her at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in June, 6 months after she'd started Project Phoenix. She was sitting in her garden, watching Schrodinger chase shadows by moonlight, when the pieces finally clicked together with the satisfying precision of a mathematical proof. The algorithm had been developed by a team of researchers who weren't just trying to predict mortality. They were trying to understand purpose. The death dates weren't endpoints. They were completion dates. Each person's algorithm was calculating when they would finish whatever cosmic assignment they'd been given, conscious of it or not. Sarah's assignment, apparently, was to discover this truth and share it with the world. But here's where the story gets really weird. And I mean, Alice in Wonderland meets quantum physics weird. Sarah realized that by discovering the algorithm's true purpose, she might have just completed her life's work. Which meant, according to the logic she'd uncovered, she should technically die now. Except she didn't. She felt more alive than ever. This paradox led her to develop what she called the completion theory of consciousness. The idea that we don't die when our bodies give out. We die when our purpose is fulfilled. But fulfilling one purpose doesn't end consciousness. It just graduates you to the next level of existence, like beating a video game and unlocking a new character. She tested this theory with the growing community of lifers she'd been counseling. Marcus, the accountant turned painter, had been creating landscapes with unusual accuracy and emotional depth. When Sarah suggested he might be documenting places that needed protection, he laughed. 3 weeks later, his paintings went viral on social media, sparking an environmental conservation movement that saved 50,000 acres of Arizona desert from development. Jennifer, the lawyer fighting environmental destruction, had been winning impossible cases against major corporations. When Sarah suggested she might be setting legal precedents for future environmental law, Jennifer initially dismissed the idea. But then she realized that each of her victories was creating a framework that other lawyers were already using to win similar cases worldwide. Ahmed, the college student studying everything, had been compiling knowledge with the systematic precision of a human Wikipedia. When Sarah suggested he might be preparing for a teaching role that would impact millions of people, he joked about becoming the next Carl Sagan. 6 months later, his YouTube channel, Universe Explained, had 10 million subscribers and was being used in classrooms around the world. Each lifer was unconsciously working towards something bigger than their individual existence. Their death dates marked when they would complete their contribution to the collective human experience. But Sarah's discovery created a new problem. If she was right about the algorithm's true purpose, then sharing this knowledge would complete her assignment, which should trigger her transition to whatever came next. Yet she felt compelled to share it, even if it meant facing the ultimate unknown. This is where the story takes a turn that would make Christopher Nolan jealous. Sarah realized she had to make a choice between preserving her current existence or fulfilling her purpose, knowing that fulfilling her purpose might end her current form of consciousness while potentially beginning something entirely new. It's like the ultimate cosmic trolley problem. Do you pull the lever to save your individual self, or do you let the train continue toward a destination that might benefit countless others, but definitely transform who you fundamentally are? Sarah spent weeks agonizing over this decision, but the answer came from the most unexpected source: Schrödinger. Yes, her dog. Bear with me here. She was watching him play in the garden when she realized that Schrödinger never questioned his purpose. He didn't spend time wondering why he chased butterflies or what would happen after his last walk. He just fully inhabited each moment, trusting that being authentically himself was enough. This observation led Sarah to her final breakthrough. The completion of purpose doesn't mean the end of consciousness. It means the evolution of consciousness. Just as a caterpillar doesn't die when it becomes a butterfly, humans might not die when they complete their earthly purpose. They might just transform into something we can't yet comprehend. Armed with this understanding, Sarah made her decision. She would share everything she discovered, not despite the consequences, but because of them. If her purpose was to reveal the truth about human purpose, then completing that task would be the most alive thing she could do. She began writing, not just blog posts or academic papers, but a comprehensive guide to understanding your life's work and embracing purposeful completion. She documented every aspect of her research, her conversations with other lifers, her theories about consciousness and completion. But as she wrote, something extraordinary happened. The more she shared, the more alive she felt. The more she embraced her purpose, the more connected she became to something larger than herself. It was as if by approaching her completion date, she was actually expanding beyond the boundaries of individual existence. The night before she planned to publish her findings, Sarah had the most vivid dream of her life. She saw the algorithm not as a computer program, but as part of a vast, interconnected system of consciousness that spanned galaxies. Every human life was a note in a cosmic symphony, and death dates weren't endings. They were the moments when individual notes resolved into harmony with a larger composition. In her dream, she saw herself not dying on November 27th, 2087, but graduating into a form of consciousness that could participate in composing the symphony itself. She saw Marcus painting landscapes on planets that didn't exist yet. She saw Jennifer arguing cases in cosmic courts that adjudicated the rights of entire species. She saw Ahmed teaching the fundamental laws of existence to consciousnesses that hadn't yet discovered bodies. When Sarah woke from this dream, she understood that the fear of death was really the fear of incompleteness. But completion didn't mean termination. It meant transformation into something more magnificent than individual existence could contain. She published her findings on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after first discovering her death date. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The story went viral, sparked international debates about consciousness and purpose, and inspired millions of people to reconsider what it meant to be alive. But the most remarkable response came from the original developers of the LifeTrack Pro algorithm, in a statement that would reshape how humanity understood its own existence. They revealed that Sarah had been absolutely correct. The algorithm had been designed to identify not death dates, but completion dates, moments when individual purposes would be fulfilled and consciousness would be ready for its next evolution. Sarah's revelation would have consequences none of them could have predicted, launching humanity into its next phase of conscious evolution. Here's where Sarah's story becomes our story, because what happened next changed everything for everyone. Not just the lifers who knew their completion dates, but every human consciousness on Earth. Within 6 months of Sarah's revelation going public, something unprecedented began happening. People who had never used the LifeTrack Pro app started spontaneously discovering their own completion dates. Not through algorithms or software, but through dreams, meditation, moments of sudden clarity during otherwise ordinary activities. It was as if Sarah's discovery had activated some dormant aspect of human consciousness, like finding a frequency that had always been broadcasting, but that nobody had known how to tune into. Anthropologists called it collective awakening. Psychologists termed it species-wide consciousness expansion. Sarah called it the most beautiful thing that had ever happened. But beautiful doesn't mean easy. Suddenly, millions of people around the world knew when they would complete their current phase of existence. The initial response was pure chaos. Stock markets crashed as people quit jobs that didn't align with their purpose. Divorce rates skyrocketed as individuals realized they were meant for different types of relationships. Universities were overwhelmed with people seeking education in subjects they'd never considered before. The world went through what historians would later call the Great Purposing, a period when humanity collectively shifted from survival-based living to purpose-based living. It was messy, transformative, and absolutely necessary. Sarah found herself at the center of this transformation, not as a leader, but as a guide. She established the Completion Institute, a research center dedicated to helping people understand and embrace their life purposes. But the most remarkable thing about the Institute wasn't its research or its programs. It was how it operated. Traditional organizations are hierarchical, with clear roles and power structures. The Completion Institute functioned more like a living organism, with people flowing in and out based on what their individual purposes required at any given moment. Sarah wasn't the CEO. She was more like a conductor helping individual musicians find their parts in a larger symphony. The Institute's work revealed patterns that fascinated scientists and philosophers alike. People with completion dates close together often had related purposes. Groups of individuals would unconsciously organize themselves to tackle complex global challenges, each person contributing their unique piece to solutions that no single mind could have conceived. Climate change, poverty, disease, space exploration. Every major challenge facing humanity began to be addressed by these spontaneous, purpose-driven collaborations. It was as if the species had suddenly developed a collective problem-solving intelligence that emerged naturally from individual purpose fulfillment. But the most profound changes were personal. People stopped fearing death because they understood completion. Relationships deepened as individuals connected based on compatible purposes rather than just attraction or convenience. The anxiety that had plagued humanity for millennia, the existential dread of meaninglessness, simply evaporated. Sarah watched all of this unfold with a mixture of amazement and deep satisfaction. Her own completion date was still November 27th, 2087, unchanged despite everything she'd accomplished. But now she understood why. Her purpose wasn't just to discover the truth about completion dates. It was to guide humanity through the transition to purpose-based living. And that task, she realized, would take exactly 64 years, 1 month, and 24 days from the morning she first saw those numbers floating above her reflection. As Sarah's story neared what appeared to be its end, she made one final discovery that would redefine everything humans thought they knew about existence. Completion doesn't mean disappearance. It means integration. On November 26th, 2087, the day before her completion date, Sarah gathered with friends, family, and colleagues at the Completion Institute. But this wasn't a funeral or a goodbye party. It was a celebration of transformation. "I'm not dying tomorrow," she told the assembled group, her 92-year-old eyes still bright with curiosity. "I'm graduating. And graduation isn't an ending. It's a commencement." The next morning, November 27th, 2087, Sarah Chun completed her purpose exactly as the algorithm had predicted 64 years earlier. But witnesses reported something extraordinary. At the moment of her completion, she didn't disappear. She seemed to become more present, more connected to everything around her, as if her individual consciousness had merged with something infinitely larger, while still remaining fundamentally herself. Those who were there described feeling Sarah's presence more intensely after her completion than they ever had while she was in her physical form. It was as if she had become part of the fabric of consciousness itself, available to guide and inspire others, while simultaneously exploring realms of existence that biological life couldn't access. The Completion Institute continued to thrive, now guided by Sarah's expanded presence, along with the team she had assembled. And people around the world reported dreaming of conversations with Sarah, receiving guidance during moments of uncertainty, feeling her encouragement when they needed to make difficult choices aligned with their purposes. Humanity had discovered that death was not the opposite of life. It was life's graduation ceremony. And so Sarah's story became humanity's story, proving that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. So here we are, at the end of Sarah's story and maybe the beginning of yours. Because that's the thing about stories like this. They don't really end, they just change hands. Sarah discovered that knowing when you'll die isn't about death at all. It's about purpose, completion, and the beautiful truth that consciousness doesn't terminate. It transforms. She learned that we're all part of something larger than individual existence, each playing our note in a cosmic symphony that's been building since consciousness first awakened to itself. But here's the wildest part. You don't need an algorithm to discover your completion date. You don't need an app or a prediction or a mystical vision. You just need to pay attention to what makes you feel most alive, most connected, most authentically yourself. Because every single day you wake up is another opportunity to discover what you're here to complete. Every choice you make is a note in that larger symphony. Every act of kindness, creativity, or courage is a contribution to the collective human experience that will outlive your physical form. Maybe your purpose is to teach, create, heal, discover, protect, or inspire. Maybe it's something the world has never seen before. Maybe it's something as simple as loving well, or as complex as solving humanity's greatest challenges. The beautiful truth Sarah discovered is that it doesn't matter what your purpose is. It only matters that you embrace it fully, without holding back, without fear of completion. Because completion isn't the end of your story. It's your story's transformation into something even more magnificent. Now, what note will you play in the symphony? What do you think your completion date might be teaching you? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how this story lands for you. And if this perspective on life and death resonated with you, perhaps others in your world would find it meaningful too.